first thing that I think of when I think of Aragon is the fight for freedom. This is the name of a video from Aragon that came out in 2018, and it got me so hot for DAOs. It was incredible. It was my first experience with DAOs. And well, this is because Aragon has been one of the hardcore OGs in the DAO tooling space. Back in 2018, they raised an absurd amount of money in their ICO, and they were dogfooding and experimenting with decentralized forms of running Aragon itself since the very beginning, which had good things and definitely also had some bad things, like the difficulties finding the right amount of delegation or overseeing when giving money to the centralized teams to build their stuff. But anyway, for whatever reason, Aragon as a product didn't quite have the success that we will all have liked. But Aragon has been through a reinvention since then, a revamp of sorts. Juliette Chevalier, developer advocacy lead at Aragon, has come today to sit on the dOrg hot seat with the intention to bring to us the new Aragon OSx. This is the new DAO framework from Aragon, built with all the learnings from years of pioneering in the DAO tooling space.
So, today I will speak to you about how does Aragon work under the hood. To give you just a bit of introduction about myself, my name is Juliette Chevalier. I lead developer advocacy at Aragon, and we have just released our new protocol in the past 3-4 months or so, and so that's what I will be sharing with you today. Now, to give you a bit of context, what is Aragon? We're a DAO framework which enables users to create and manage organizations on-chain. But let's take a bit of a deeper dive as to what that actually means. So the way we've designed our DAO framework is that the key thing that you can do is, of course, create organizations. Now, organizations are a group of people, and so as such, you're able to also manage your organization's membership. These people will be making decisions in how to manage their assets and use those assets to execute actions on chain. Now, this is all important because, firstly, because organizations are a group of people, it means that we can't really envision how these people will behave, the types of initiatives that they'll be bringing about, how they'll be using their funds, and how they'll be distributing their tokens. And so the way we've structured our framework from an architectural perspective is that really the framework enables you to create organizations, but everything else that you can do for DAOs is enabled through DAO plugins. Now, let's take a look at an Aragon DAO so that we can get a bit into context as to what that means and the implications. So firstly, when you're deploying a DAO, essentially you're deploying an instance of a DAO.sol contract. This contract, you can imagine it as a treasury, a vault holding funds. You're able to deposit assets into the contract. You can execute any action on behalf of the DAO. And so really the DAO.sol contract is the core of the DAO that you're deploying. Now, everything else, like I said, that you're able to do, you're doing it through plugins. Now, these plugins may be voting mechanisms, it may be a bundling of actions that you're putting together, maybe some connection with other ecosystem contracts, or it could just be something, a logic that says that whenever you're withdrawing assets, you donate a fund to your favorite environmental cause. Like, it doesn't really matter, right? Plugins are super wide open, and we'll see in a sec what they actually mean from a technical background. But the idea is that all of the functionality that a DAO can do is enabled through these plugins. Now, how are these two connected? They're connected through permissions. And so the way we've set it up is that every DAO contract will have its permission manager, its permissions database. And these permissions work both ways. On one end, you may grant the execute permission from the DAO to a plugin, so that a plugin is able to execute actions on behalf of the DAO, like, say, withdraw assets, right? Or they may work the other way around, where we grant the DAO permissions to call on functions specifically created by the plugins. Like, for example, adding members, creating proposals, etc. And so permissions are really what's connecting these two contracts. Now, if we see that as the picture of what an Aragon DAO is, I think the next key portion of why this is interesting is because we're able to customize DAOs specifically in two fronts. On one layer, of course, through plugins. Each DAO is different, not only based on the plugins that they select for their DAO, but also in being able to create their own plugins if what you're looking to build is not currently there in our plugin registry. So you're really able to do a lot with these types of organizations. And then on the other layer, you're able to customize the DAO's UI. Currently, we have the Aragon app, which supports X types of plugins, X types of functionality. But if you're looking for a community that's potentially in Japan and you want it to be tailored to the user experience that best works there, to the language that best works there, then you may want to be adapting how you're interacting with your DAO. And we have an SDK that enables engineers to do that. So with that context in mind, let's take a bit of a deeper dive into the technical background of what these DAO plugins are. So firstly, just to point out some examples of plugins like I've mentioned before, certainly governance mechanisms are the most common one. We also have additional coordination functionalities like, say, reputation systems, coordination graphs, role granting. All of these are functionalities that you can enhance through plugins. We also have ideas like treasury management, bonding curves, staking rewards, and being able to connect with other ecosystem players to generate some yield out of the treasury for DAOs. We can also do action bundles so that we're not calling a bunch of different actions and a bunch of different transactions, but really bundle them together to make it easier for DAOs to make decisions. And ultimately just ecosystem integrations really with any contract around on the chain that you're deployed to. And so when we take a look at the implementation of a plugin and what it really is for us developers who are building them, we're really looking at two key contracts. Firstly, we're looking at the plugin implementation contract. This is the contract that will contain the logic of your plugin. This is where we say, add a member, vote, create proposal, the one that really holds all of that extra functionality that you want your DAO to be able to do. And then we have the plugin setup contract. And the plugin setup contract is the instructions. These are the instructions for installing, uninstalling, upgrading your plugin. It'll be the contract that connects our plugin installer from our framework to the new contract that you've just deployed. And so when we're taking a look at this plugin life cycle, we're really looking at 4 key steps. First, we're building and deploying the plugin as engineers. Then we're publishing that plugin into the plugin registry for Aragon so that any Aragon DAO is able to use it. Then you're installing a specific plugin into a DAO, and then you're using that plugin for your interactions. So what I'll show you a bit today is an example of a plugin, as well as an example of how we can use the SDK to customize the UI of a specific DAO. Now, before I dive into that a bit quick, what I want to do is I want to first showcase the architecture of how our framework is set up, so that as we're diving into the demo, you'll be able to spot these packages being used around. So firstly, we have the core contracts. Now, these core contracts are the foundation of the framework. This is the interfaces that as a user will be interacting with, right? This is the actual DAO contract that contains the withdraw, the deposit, the execute functions that we showed earlier with its permission manager. Then we have the plugin, right? And for plugins, we have an array of base templates. These can be upgradable plugins, non-upgradable plugins, clonable, etc., so that an engineer can simply go ahead and say, contract is plugin, and already get functionality out of the box. And then on top of it, we have the framework contracts. And the framework contracts are really the services that are provided for these interfaces to work and interact with each other. So this is where we have the factories, where the DAO factory and the plugin factory. It's also where we have the registry. So we have the registry of all of the DAOs being created. We have the plugin registry of all the plugins that we have within our framework. And then we also have the installer contracts, which essentially install the plugin into the DAO. And we'll take a look at what that installation means within the demo. So having that said, let's get to it. What I have right here, and let me know if you need me to make these bigger, is a contract for a plugin. Yes.
We're still seeing the Aragon OSx architecture.
Amazing. Thank you for that shout. Let's fix that. Change windows, screens, entire screen. All right. Can you see my VS Code now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, beautiful. If anyone knows how to solve this problem with VS Code, I am in desperate need. It always throws in no matter how much I change the compiler, so hit me up for that. But having that said, what we have here is a voting power plugin. It's essentially a plugin that grants a specific address, an amount of voting power, and then they're able to vote within proposals for that DAO. So the first thing that we do is that we pull in from these plugin-based contracts that I was mentioning earlier. What I've done here is that I've imported the Aragon OSx package, and so I have access now to those contracts that I was mentioning before. Now, by doing that, I gain access to two things. Firstly, I get access to the authentication modifier, which we should see, for example, here. And the authentication modifier, what it does is that it ensures that only addresses with the add member permission are able to call on this function. And so that ensures that our functions are being secure and that not anyone is calling on functions that we don't want anyone to call. Now, where is this permission coming? This permission, I've set it up right in the beginning of my plugin. And so the idea here is that I'm creating a kekak hash, which I know that whenever I'm calling on kekak and this string, I'll be able to get the hash for that permission. So we know that this won't change and won't be mutating as we go. And with this permission, this is what then on the voting plugin setup contract, I will be granting to the DAO so that only the DAO is able to add members to our organization. And that is essentially what we're playing with here. The rest of the plugin is a bunch of just functionality. For example, we're able to have an event when a member is added. We have modifiers checking whether a member has already been added or not to the DAO, whether a member is the proposal creator, whether the proposal is active, whether the proposal is over. We have a constructor that defines what is the minimum voting power for a specific member. And something that's important to keep in mind here, specifically with the constructor, is that we're passing it as we initialize it, the specific DAO that we want to be installing this plugin into, and we'll see how this plays a role within the plugin setup contract that'll share with you a little bit later. And then, of course, what we're returning is this plugin interface with the DAO that the plugin is being installed into. Now, I don't want to dive too much deep into like the specific functionality of this plugin. It's a smart contract enabling people to vote and create proposal, things like this. But really the most important part is that we have an authentication modifier that we get in from this plugin contract that we're inheriting from, and that we are also able to call on the DAO instance. So thanks to me being able to import that package, I am now able to call on DAO, execute, and pass in whatever actions I want to be passing into my function. And so once we have our logic and our implementation done, that's when we move into the plugin setup. Now, the plugin setup contract is always the same. In contrast to the plugin contract, which is of course specific logic that you may want to define and you're building it based on your needs, the plugin setup contract will always expect a prepare installation function, a prepare on installation function, this implementation function, so that we can just read this is an empty function that we're be inheriting from based on the package that we're installing. Sorry, from this one. And then we can also have a prepare upgrade function if our plugin is upgradable. Now, inside of it, what we will have is the granting of the permissions that our plugin needs. So if we see here that we need to have that our DAO should have an add member permission and a set voting power permission, then those are the ones that I'll be granting to the DAO within my prepare installation and the ones that'll be revoking from the DAO whenever I'm uninstalling my plugin. So if I take a look at the code here, I'm essentially first initializing the plugin. As you can see, we'll only be deploying the plugin setup contract, which in turn, when installing the plugin, will deploy the voting power plugin that I've just created. And then once I have access to that plugin, I can say, please grant to the permission found in this plugin. This is the action where the functionality is held to the DAO, and grant this permission. Conditions are additional contracts that we can pass in if we want this granting to only happen under certain conditions, which is not the case here, but it certainly allows for a lot of interesting functionality as plugins get more complex. And we do the same thing for the other permission. When we're speaking about revoking, again, it's the same thing. We're revoking now rather than granting to this plugin, in this plugin, to this DAO, this permission. Now, once we have that done, you essentially just deploy the plugin setup contract. And once you have that plugin setup contract deployed, what we'll do is that we'll go into the plugin repo contract, and we can easily deploy it there to Aragon. So I like to show it simply on like Etherscan because it's the simplest, but of course we're actually building a CLI for it so that you're able to simply deploy it, publish without having to actually run all of this yourself. This is already done and should be out on NPM quite soon, so that's exciting. And what we want to do is you go into the contract. Into the contract, we do write. And we're essentially creating a plugin repo with its first version. We pass it a subdomain. This subdomain should be written like this. And what it'll do is that it'll generate a subdomain for you, that plugin.dao.eth, so that you can find your contract easier. We'll pass in the address of the contract that we've just deployed, the maintainer, which in this case would be myself, and any metadata for the release and the build that I may want others to know about my plugin. These are things like description, permission, or even like any UI that you may wanna pass in forward. Now, just with that, you have a plugin deployed and published. And the idea here is that from then on forward, what you'll want to do is create a proposal that has the installation of this plugin, so that whenever a proposal passes, then the plugin is installed into the DAO. Now, as of now, the Aragon app doesn't yet enable you to install and uninstall plugins from the UI. Oh, why is it looking like a mobile? From the UI, but that's weird. But we are able to do it through the SDK, and we are able to do it through just enabling the actions and passing them in. So that's kind of a next step of where we're at when we're looking at the UI for it. Now, when it comes to the customization of a DAO from a UI perspective, like I said, we have an SDK. So we'll just import the Aragon SDK client package into our, say this is a React app. In this case, I've created it within context so that I have access to the Aragon SDK context throughout my application. And I'll pass in some specific parameters so that I can first configure the client, and then I'll have access to it throughout my application. So for example, if I wanted to enable the creation of a DAO, I can simply call on the Aragon SDK client, pass it in the metadata for my DAO, pass it in the parameters for the plugins that I'll be installing. In this case, I'm installing the token voting plugin, which needs some configuration to pass in some in its constructor, right? Like minimum duration, minimum participation, etc. And then I'm just encoding it and creating my DAO with this plugin installed. I can also call on deposit ETH and simply go SDK methods deposit and pass it in. Of course, then embedding this into some nice UI component. I can display proposals. This is all commented out, not sure why. I can list out members, etc. So wanted to showcase kind of this two-layered approach so that you're able to see both the functionalities that you're able to do in order to customize your own organizations, leveraging our new stack. Now that's it. Thank you.
Nice. What a speed run. That was beautiful. Thank you. We have our first question from Andre. Andre, feel free to join.
Hey, Andre.
Hey there.
Hi.
Thanks for the presentation, Juliet. I think the architecture is really sound. A couple of questions for you, though. Do you have anything developed, maybe a plugin for dispute resolution? Then I know you guys were doing secret voting a while ago. I'm wondering if you still have that, and if the implementation is open source, if we can look at it. And I have another question which might be a little bit out of your scope, and if that's the case, just say so and don't even touch it. How are you guys monetizing this? And if you're not, can you maybe speak a little bit to how you can, fund this kind of effort? And in general, for this vertical, for this type of product, can you speak a little bit of how this can be monetized? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Great questions. Do I have anywhere where I can share some text here? I'd love to. Oh, yeah.
There's a chat on the.
So what I've shared here is the link of the current plugins that we have within our ecosystem. Going back to your first question regarding dispute resolution, I know that there is one team currently working on it. I can definitely connect you if this is something that's of interest to you, but it's not one that we already have at least supported within the app. And I think they've deployed it to Mumbai. I'm not sure if they deployed it to Polygon already, but more than happy to put you in contact with that team if that's something that you're interested in.
Yeah, super interested, or maybe just a link to the documentation if they have.
Yeah, for sure. Then your other question.
Secret voting.
The other question was secret voting. You're right. So we have a CK research team who is focused heavily on private voting, both at the end of counting the votes, as well as the results, as well as the secrecy of the members for the DAO and the members who have, in fact, contributed to the organizations. We have done several prototypes, and I'll share with you the link so that you can review all of the work that this team is doing. But essentially, most of these are at a prototype state. I know that we've just finished actually an implementation for private voting for Nouns DAO, and that should be done within the next week or so. It should be wrapping up quite quick. So more than happy to share that with you as well once that comes up. But essentially, we have a team that is working on the research, and the next step that we have enabled is now one of our top engineers is working on productizing these features to that next stage. So that's certainly something that's of crucial importance to us, really understanding the regulatory landscape as well of DAOs that we're playing in.
To add a little bit of context here for the listeners that are joining this season onto the dOrg hot seat. In season 1, we had the Vogdoni team coming on, and they explained a little bit what they were doing. That was, I think, almost 6 months ago. So it would be like a little bit updated maybe a little bit outdated considering how these things move in terms of speed, but definitely worth giving them a try and digging deep. If you want to dig deep onto secret voting and how to use like on-chain voting and using ZK, that episode has really, really golden nuggets as well. For context, the Vogdoni team is a part of Aragon as well.
Yeah, great shout. So actually, the Vogdoni team is currently building, they've already built a plugin for off-chain voting directly within Aragon. I know that currently we're adding it with support to our UI, but that should be rolling out in the next few months or so. I think maybe like 1.5, 2 months. So something else to look out for sure. And then when it comes to monetization, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the history of Aragon as an organization, but we launched back in 2016, where we raised an ICO of around $25 million at that time, at a point at which ETH was $80. So due to great treasury management, that treasury has grown. At one point, I think it was around 300 million. Now, depending on the volatility of the day, it may roam anywhere between like 170 to 200 million. So it's an organization that is really well funded, and we have runway for 80 years to come, if not more. Now, having that said, monetization is certainly a key aspect of our roadmap as we're headed to next, and we're looking at a few different possibilities. We're not thinking of enforcing fees directly from the protocol and like the DAO creation specifically, but rather looking at a plugin insurance program both for DAOs as well as for plugin developers, looking at sponsoring audits, looking at or exploring more so a model where we could also reward plugin builders based on usage of their plugins, and us take a fee as well. So some revenue sharing models there as well. So we're at a stage where that is, now that we have the new protocol and things are out and we're gaining some traction, this is certainly a key point in a radar that we're exploring heavily. But I'll say that as of now, the product is entirely free to use, and so feel free to play around and enjoy it as it is.
Thank you so much. This was very insightful.
You're welcome.
Like already like a paid forward public good where you can just deploy this DAO frameworks as you will, because 2017 was good to Aragon. We have another question from Phil.
Hey Phil, welcome in. Feel free to also post your questions on the chat, and I'll be able to take a look there. Yeah, Clara, great job. Do you know any implementation of Moloch-like functionality plug transfers and rage quit? Great question. So actually, for the ETH Global Pairs hackathon, we requested this type of plugin implementation. We mostly posted out as the bigger problem of how can DAOs fundraise easier and enable a way for contributors to exit in the case that they no longer align with the values of the organization. Now we got some cool projects in, but none that were explicitly like shares or rage quit. But it's something that we really want to see being built. So if you want to give it a go, more than happy to chat maybe one-on-one and take a look at how we can set that up. It's been requested by several people, so we're really excited to see that in the framework. But I'll say that as of now, I have yet to see it from our plugin developers. Now, keep in mind, we're still like 4 months out since we launched, so it's still very early in terms of external development work. Great time to come in and contribute.
Cool. I wanted to talk a little bit about the permissions database. It seems that the database can be accessed by the plugins, and plugins can give other plugins access to managing their plugins, to the functions in their plugins. Is that correct?
It is correct. However, we don't advise it like that, and I can go a bit deeper into that, but I'd love to hear more of where your head is at.
Yeah, so it was basically like, how far can you go, and how much are we opening up the door for obscuring different relationships between plugins to the point that you end up giving permissions to maybe a malicious plugin or something that apparently, and maybe at a one jump of plugin scale, is completely harmless, but this other plugin also has access to this other plugin, and this other plugin ends up having access to the core functionality of the DAO. So yeah, exactly. Yeah. I would like to hear your thoughts about how are you avoiding this.
Yeah, nailed it. So that's a key concern for sure. And that has kind of two big concerns. One of them is certainly just the malicious contract in general, being able to gain, say, execute permission on the DAO, that itself, whether it's coming from a malicious address that may be an externally owned account or a plugin is a big fear. And then the other one is the dependency between plugins, which is also a big problem. And so I'll dive into both. Particularly on the dependency problem, the key thing here is that you don't want to come into a situation where one plugin gets uninstalled and all of a sudden nothing in the rest of your DAO works, or your DAO gets bricked because of uninstalling a dependency that another plugin had. This is a key concern, and it's a key reason why kind of everywhere within our documentation and every time we're speaking to engineers, we're really trying to ensure that plugins are all-encompassing, and they have a specific objective or a next specific goal, rather than trying to cover absolutely everything. So that is one solution for that in terms of architecture, although in reality, like you've mentioned, nothing is prohibiting you from doing that. So that's one end. Then when it comes to the security portion of it, certainly a problem with permissionless architecture. It's something that we've thought very seriously, and we've come up with a few solutions for it. Although at the end of the day, if a DAO is installing a plugin that is malicious, ultimately there is not much we can do about it. So the way our architecture works is that it's open. Anyone can create a plugin, even if it's a malicious plugin. You'll be able to create it and publish it, because we're not checking for the functionality of your plugin in order to determine whether it can be published or not. So in that regard, it is open for anyone to publish. Now, having that said, some ways that we're handling to mitigate that. Firstly, we're taking very seriously the plugins that we're supporting on the application layer. So specifically through the UI, not all of the plugins that are published will be supported for DAOs to easily install and uninstall. And so that's a great way for us to really vet the types of the types of plugins that DAOs can install. Then secondly, we'll be sponsoring audits for plugins that we're seeing needed and that people are demanding, especially as we have the modularity framework within our application, and people are able to install and uninstall plugins easier. This is a key next step that we see in order to ensure security. And thirdly, we have a design principle that really rules all of our decision making, which is ensuring that these organizations are human-centered. And so if you go at the application and kind of like dabble a bit around the Aragon UI, you'll be able to see that all of the transactions that you're signing, it's not just bytecode or a bunch of addresses that make no sense. We've really taken a step to that next step and taken a look at importing comments, trying to make them human readable, trying to provide some data, and so ensuring that the experience for the user feels safe thanks to the design practices that we've been implementing. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, that does. So basically trying to limit the or try to self-contain all the plugins on one side, and then by curating as a first line of defense the plugins that people can access. And secondly, if you start seeing traction from other plugins that are not part of the curated set, maybe try to sponsor some audits for this and include them within the curated set.
Exactly.
Would that be a good summary? All right, we have time for one last question from Clara.
Yes, she says, I'm curious to know what other plugins you'd like to see being built in the forthcoming months, not on your current roadmap. A great question, Clara. So things that we're certainly on the lookout. Number one, any type of interesting governance mechanism. I think DAOs are enabling ways for people to make decisions on assets together in a way that's innovative, that's potentially fun, that really arrives at the best possible decision making. And so we really want to be seeing more governance mechanisms added. We currently have token voting, we have address list voting, which essentially means a list of addresses are able to vote. We have a multi-sig, which means that X amount of people need to sign the transaction in order for the proposal to go. And then we also have what we internally call kind of like the dictatorship plugin, which is like an admin plugin, right? Where like one person holds control to really execute actions on behalf of the DAO around. And that's usually better suited for like DAOs who are starting out and who may want to still like play around with their organization before they take decentralization to the next step. So those are the ones that are currently being added and supported, but would love to see, say, some quadratic voting being added, different types of decision making, especially as DAOs are entering a lot of like governance attacks, some civil resistance mechanisms being added. We just saw some integration with WorldCoin, some integration with Gitcoin Passport, so more things like that. From another one doing KYC for members. So different things like that is certainly always interesting to us. And then on the other layer, certainly more of the treasury management fundraising portion. I think something that was proven within the last bull round was how well suited DAOs are to raise funds as an initial mechanism. And so on one layer, seeing more ways that encourage that kind of behavior, be it through rage quitting, be it through funding curves, be it through liquidity pool management, and that's one key portion of it. And then the other one is yield generating strategies. So for DAOs who may have these treasuries potentially not moving that often, being able to generate some yield in a way where the DAO can still hold funds, but at the same time get some return of investment in their assets. So I'd say those are kind of the two key buckets that we're looking at mostly.
Perfect. Thank you very much. On that aspect, I would like to, if you are listener, and you would like to use any of these new plugins and you need help building it, we at dOrg, we are Aragon DAO experts, which means that we can very easily help you build any customized solutions using Aragon. And we'll be happy to jump with you into this adventure of creating one of these new plugins. So for all your needs, please let us know. All right, so that has been all the time that we have today. And Juliette, thank you very much for explaining yourself so clearly. We had one of the best technical demonstrations that we've had here. I love that you shared and you really let us see deep into the entrails of what an Aragon plugin is. So very much appreciated with your time, and you have definitely passed the hot seat test. So thanks for coming.
Thank you. Have a good day, and don't hesitate to reach out. More than happy to learn kind of what you're thinking and support you along the way.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I'm sure we'll see you very soon.